Hello. Today we will delve into a strange story filled with money, conspiracy, love, and revenge. A story that, perhaps from its very first details, will send a shiver down your spine. To better understand this case, let us travel back in time to the year 2002 to visit the city of Angeles, also known as the City of Angels, located in the northern Philippines. Angeles is a small city with a population of over 400,000. Yet it possesses a history full of turmoil, from being occupied by Japan to becoming the site of the American Clark Air Base. This city has witnessed countless ups and downs. The presence of a massive military base like Clark attracted a large number of soldiers and foreign immigrants, which in turn drew flocks of Filipinos seeking job opportunities and a new life. Angeles flourished, especially at night, when darkness fell. The streets were filled with soldiers seeking pleasure and lavishly dressed women. Although the U.S. military later withdrew, Angeles retained its old traditions. Bars, casinos, and karaoke parlors sprang up like mushrooms, transforming it into the largest red light district in Southeast Asia, attracting tourists from all over the world. Because of these characteristics, Angeles was also nicknamed the Sin City of the Philippines, a name full of implications. And the story we are about to explore took place in this very city of chaotic sin. The main character of our story is named Stephen Davis, an exceptional software engineer. Though still very young, he was the director of a company in the Philippines, a successful, wealthy man with a promising future. Stephen's annual income exceeded 60,000 British pounds, a truly enviable figure, making him a true model of success. He was born on March 27, 1970 in Nottingham, England, to an ordinary family. Stephen was the eldest, with two younger sisters. His childhood, though a bit mischievous, was generally that of a good boy, and the family of five lived a happy and peaceful life together. However, tragedy struck when Stephen was 14. A car accident claimed the life of his father. The immense grief seemed to change him overnight. The boy appeared to mature in a single evening. As the only man left in the family, Stephen shouldered the responsibility of caring for his mother and two sisters. He became incredibly diligent and thoughtful, always putting his family first. A few years later, Stephen's mother remarried a man named Alan. Alan's presence brought joy back to the family. He got along well with the children and became a new pillar of support, allowing Stephen more time to pursue his passion for computers. He spent all his free time tinkering and studying computers, uninterested in hanging out with friends or engaging in outside entertainment, and remarkably, through this self-study, Stephen not only mastered computer hardware, but also became proficient in programming. In the 1980s, this was an extremely valuable skill. Thanks to his self-taught talent, Stephen quickly found a stable job, which brought great relief to his family. Stephen poured all his energy into his work, and by the age of 21, his outstanding performance caught the eye of a company in Hong Kong. They were willing to offer him 3 times his current salary to come work for them. A huge opportunity, a new turning point, awaited him. Faced with such a generous salary, Stephen was convinced. He also wanted to travel and see the world. His mother, Margaret, didn't want her son to be tied down by family obligations. Though reluctant to see him go, she supported his dream. Let us remember this mother, for she is a crucial character in today's story. Stephen took the new job and worked diligently in Hong Kong. He quickly established himself. The high salary and favorable work conditions made his life prosperous. Alongside his work, weekend relaxation was essential at that time. Many wealthy individuals would travel to Angeles City for entertainment. As mentioned, the place was famous for its nightlife, with countless casinos, bars, and other entertainment venues. More importantly, the prices were quite reasonable. Stephen and his colleagues often flew to Angeles on weekends to unwind. Besides visiting bars and seeking female companionship, Stephen's favorite pastime was flying. He had a passion for propeller-driven aircraft and even joined an aviation club in Angeles, flying whenever he had free time. One day, upon entering a bar, Stephen was captivated by a very young, innocent-looking face amidst the crowd of women. She was a girl with a gentle demeanor, exactly his type, without hesitation. Stephen chose her and spent the night with her in the bars of Angeles at that time. Such girls were not uncommon. They typically came from impoverished, uneducated families, dancing in bars or selling their bodies to make a living. According to the rates of the time, a girl dancing in a bar for a night would earn about £1, while selling her body would fetch £5. After a few days together, Stephen became even more certain that this girl was the other half destined for him by fate. He generously paid the bar owner £500 to buy her freedom. The girl's name was Evelyn, and she came from Dinagat Island, an impoverished island in the Philippines. There was no running water, no electricity. Homes were mere mud and thatch huts. The people there only hoped to have enough to eat, let alone receive an education, due to extreme poverty. Girls on the island dreamed from a young age of working in a bar, hoping to catch the eye of a wealthy man who could change their destiny and that of their families. Evelyn had left home for the bustling city of Angeles at the tender age of 13. She worked as a dancer in a bar. Although her daily income was a meager £1, it was far better than life at home. At least she had enough to eat and decent clothes to wear. Like many other girls, Evelyn yearned for the day a rich, blue-eyed, blonde-haired foreigner would notice her and rescue her from her current life. Evelyn felt incredibly lucky to have met Stephen. To her, he was the ideal man, young, handsome, kind, and doting. Most importantly, he was very wealthy, truly the man of her dreams. During their time together, Evelyn was always obedient, gentle, and eager to please him. This greatly satisfied Stephen and sparked a wild idea in his mind to marry her. Though fully aware of her past, he didn't dare tell his parents the whole truth about Evelyn's circumstances. He only mentioned that she came from a poor fishing village, was uneducated, and had once worked in a bar. His mother, Margaret, misunderstood, thinking the bar he referred to was just an ordinary British pub and didn't pay it much mind. In 1997, Margaret and her husband flew to Hong Kong to visit their son. This was also their first time meeting Evelyn, their future daughter-in-law. Although Evelyn appeared polite and well-behaved, after a few days of interaction, Margaret developed a sense of unease about her. She felt that her son and Evelyn were worlds apart. One was a senior computer expert, the other had never been to school, was illiterate, and they had no common ground for conversation. It was as if they lived in two completely different universes. However, she could do nothing but accept her son's choice and pray for their happiness. In March 1997, Stephen and Evelyn registered their marriage in Hong Kong. At the time, Evelyn was only 17. Being too young, she borrowed her older sister's ID card and falsified her age to 21, not long after the wedding. Evelyn became pregnant and gave birth to their first daughter, Jessica, 2 years later. Their son Joshua was born, and the family of 4 lived a seemingly blissful life. Shortly after his son's birth, Stephen decided he wanted to move and settle in the Philippines, specifically in Angeles, the city where he and Evelyn had first met. Another significant reason for choosing the Philippines was that his company's headquarters in Hong Kong had opened a branch in Makati, and Stephen was appointed as the branch director with a handsome salary of at least £5,000 a month. This was a dream salary in the Philippines. Stephen rented a house in an affluent area of Angeles, about a 3-hour drive from his office, for his wife and children. He gave Evelyn £1,000 a month for expenses. It must be noted that this amount was equivalent to the annual income of an average local resident. Additionally, he hired a housekeeper to manage the household chores and care for the children. This housekeeper was none other than Evelyn's own sister. Thus, Evelyn could live a life of comfort while being close to her family. Everything in Stephen's family seemed to be running smoothly. Evelyn had almost no responsibilities. In just a few short years, she had transformed from a dancer earning £1 to £5 a day into a wealthy housewife with a monthly allowance of £1,000. Her family also benefited greatly. Stephen spent a considerable amount of money on his father-in-law, helping him buy a fishing boat and build the first brick house in their village. It could be said that since latching on to the golden goose that was Stephen, Evelyn's and her family's lives had changed dramatically, becoming the envy of their entire village. As for Stephen, his life seemed perfect: a beautiful wife, wonderful children, a thriving career, However, human greed knows no bounds. A meticulously planned, sinister plot was quietly taking shape, with him as its unsuspecting target. On July 17, 2002, a normal Wednesday, Stephen and his colleague Michael were buried in work until 10 o'clock at night. By the time they finished packing up and returned to the apartment the company rented for them, it was already 10:45 p.m. Stephen was exhausted. He fell asleep the moment his head hit the pillow. Michael, however, couldn't sleep. His girlfriend was on a flight from Hong Kong to see him, after picking her up from the airport. Michael returned to the apartment at 1 a.m. The couple showered, talked for a while, and then prepared for bed. But just as they lay down, Michael's girlfriend sensed something was wrong. She heard footsteps outside the door and saw the flicker of a light from under the doorway. Michael thought perhaps Stephen had woken up, but before he could call out, their bedroom door was violently kicked open. Three strange men stood before them. "Get down," one of them yelled in Tagalog, pressing the cold barrel of a gun to Michael's head. "Is it him? Is it him?" After receiving a negative response, the three men quickly withdrew. They then stormed the adjacent room where Stephen was sleeping. The air was split by the sound of four sharp reports. What followed was the sound of frantic footsteps clattering down the stairs, the roar of a car engine starting, and the squeal of tires as the vehicle sped away, vanishing into the night. It all happened so fast. By the time Michael gathered his wits, it was far too late. He found Stephen in a state that left no room for hope. The scene was one of utter devastation, a silent tableau of violence that spoke volumes without showing a single drop of blood. The stillness in the room was more terrifying than any sound. Michael's mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. His friend, vibrant and full of life just hours before, was now just gone. The absence of his breath was a deafening silence. Michael scrambled to call the police, his hands trembling too much to dial correctly at first. An ambulance arrived, its sirens wailing through the quiet night, and rushed Stephen to the hospital. But every effort was in vain. Michael frantically tried to contact Evelyn, Stephen's wife, but it took him 4 agonizing hours to finally reach her. He assumed that upon hearing the horrific news, Evelyn would immediately notify Stephen's parents in England, but she did no such thing. Reluctantly, Michael had to make the call himself to Margaret, Stephen's mother. Hearing the news, Margaret was stunned, collapsing onto the sofa. It took her an hour to regain her composure, consumed by grief. She and her husband hastily arranged a flight to the Philippines. 2 days later, at the funeral home, they were finally reunited with their son. Margaret and her husband questioned the Philippine police about what had transpired. It's unclear whether it was out of fear that the murder of a British citizen would cause an unwelcome diplomatic dispute or for some other reason. But the police investigation was surprisingly swift. After just 1 day, they concluded it was a murder resulting from a business conflict. They suspected the perpetrators were Stephen's business partners or competitors. However, Margaret did not agree with this conclusion. She argued that if it were a business dispute, Michael, Stephen's colleague, would not have been spared. More importantly, Michael recalled that on that fateful night, the three assailants had asked, "Is it him? Is it him?" They were clearly looking for a specific target. The Philippine police then changed their story, claiming the incident was merely a case of mistaken identity in a robbery. Margaret still wasn't convinced. She felt a deep, chilling sense of unease about Evelyn, her daughter-in-law. "I have never been so certain of anything in my life," she said. "I know that Evelyn is behind this." Of course, Margaret's conviction wasn't based solely on a woman's intuition. It was supported by several suspicious points. First, after Stephen's death, Evelyn didn't even bother to call his family. It was Michael who had to deliver the devastating news. This was clearly abnormal behavior for a grieving wife. Second, when Margaret and her husband arrived at the funeral home, Evelyn did not greet or comfort them. She behaved like a complete stranger. There was not a flicker of sorrow on her face. The first words out of her mouth were, "Have you seen Michael? Did he say anything?" She even had the audacity to ask for money. Her cold, detached attitude was highly suspect. More disturbingly, Evelyn inadvertently revealed that the killers had been in the apartment for 20 minutes. Michael might have seen them, she'd said, but the police had never released this detail about the 20-minute time frame. So how did Evelyn know? Third, a few months prior, during a visit to the Philippines, Margaret had a habit of recording everything with her video camera. She had unintentionally captured footage of Evelyn, frequently making furtive phone calls behind everyone's back, sometimes laughing loudly. At the time, she had felt something was amiss, and now, reflecting on it, it seemed even more suspicious. Fourth, before his death, Stephen had called his mother, confiding that his marriage was in trouble. He told her Evelyn only knew how to demand and spend money, had even stolen from him, and neglected both the housework and the children. Fifth, while sorting through her son's belongings, Margaret found a pawn ticket. It was dated 2 weeks before Stephen's death. The item pawned was his wedding ring, and the person who pawned it was Evelyn. Sixth, when Margaret tried to pay the rent for Evelyn's house, the landlord revealed that Evelyn frequently invited male friends over while Stephen was at work, causing disturbances and noise. The landlord had even considered evicting them. All these clues pointed to something dark and hidden about Evelyn. However, when Margaret presented her suspicions to the Philippine police, they dismissed them, stating that the evidence was insufficient and merely speculative, and that they could not proceed with a further investigation. In reality, with crime rampant in the area, robberies, thefts, and sexual offenses being daily occurrences, the police lacked the manpower to thoroughly investigate every case. Seeing the police's indifference, Margaret sought help from the British Embassy in the Philippines. But strangely, the embassy showed little interest either. Perhaps they were all too familiar with the chaotic situation and knew that intervention would be futile. They advised Margaret to leave the Philippines and return home. Hearing this, Margaret was utterly devastated. In a foreign, chaotic city where even the authorities were unwilling to intervene, what could a vulnerable woman like her possibly do? Perhaps this was precisely why the culprit dared to act so audaciously. But Margaret was not just a vulnerable woman. She was a mother. She could not accept her son dying in such an unjust manner. Even if the whole world turned its back on her, even if she had to stand alone, Margaret was determined to uncover the truth so her son's soul could rest in peace. Investigating the case on her own in a foreign land was obviously fraught with difficulty and danger. Locals warned her that anyone who stood to benefit from Stephen's death would see her and her husband as obstacles, making them the next targets. But Margaret was undeterred. From that moment on, she was no longer a grieving, helpless woman. She transformed into a mother thirsty for vengeance, determined to drag the perpetrator into the light. Margaret began to analyze the case like a true detective, equipped with a notebook, a tape recorder, and other tools. In her notebook, she wrote, "Why was Evelyn so short of money? Where did her money go? Who was the person she was secretly contacting so often? Was it her lover who were the men she frequently invited to the house? Could they be the killers?" Although she had a clear method, investigating alone was impossible. So, Margaret spent a significant sum of money to hire a local private investigator to look into Evelyn and secretly trail her 24/7. Simultaneously, she actively reached out to Evelyn's family, friends, and relatives. Her method was simple: exchange money for information. This tactic, though straightforward, proved highly effective. Stephen's colleagues revealed the escalating conflicts between him and Evelyn. Their relationship, once good, had become strained in recent months. The primary cause was Evelyn's affair, her insatiable demands for money, and her thievery. She cared for nothing, not even her own children. On one occasion, when Stephen took their daughter Jessica to school, he discovered she hadn't even been enrolled. The school fees he had provided had been spent by Evelyn. After that, Stephen had a serious talk with Evelyn, telling her that if she ended the affair, their marriage could still be saved. He gave her two options: go to university or get a job. But Evelyn, accustomed to a life of leisure, refused both. Ultimately, Stephen was forced to cut off her allowance. This was a risky move. His colleagues had warned him to be wary of Evelyn's potential retaliation. Yet, Stephen remained calm. After that, the conflict between them intensified. becoming irreconcilable. Stephen started spending more time at the apartment near his office, frequenting bars and rarely returning home. Another critical clue emerged. Evelyn was intimately involved with a man named Arnold. They were often seen in close embraces, strongly suggesting he was her lover. At the same time, after weeks of surveillance, the private investigator discovered two men who frequently and secretly visited Evelyn's house. One of them was Arnold. The investigator managed to take clear photographs of them. Armed with these leads, the police were suddenly much more cooperative. They quickly apprehended the two men, Arnold and a security guard friend of his named Alexander. Ironically, due to a tight budget, Margaret had to cover the travel and fuel expenses for the police to go from Makati to Angeles to investigate and arrest the suspects. After the two suspects were in custody, Michael, the key witness, was brought to the police station. He immediately identified them as the men who had attacked him and Stephen that night. With Michael's direct testimony, on August 16, 2002, Arnold and Alexander were charged with murder. It seemed as though the case was closed with the killers behind bars. But things were not that simple. A kind-hearted police officer warned Margaret that when a Western man marries a Filipino woman, he marries her entire family. If things go wrong, that sweet little kitten can turn into a ferocious tiger. He advised her to be careful. At the same time, the embassy issued a final warning, urging Margaret and her husband to leave the Philippines immediately, or they would face retaliation. The embassy had learned that the two arrested men were former police officers, and the Philippine police might protect their own. Furthermore, they had ties to local gangs and would likely target Margaret. If she were to be harmed, there would be no plaintiff, and the case would be quietly dropped. After careful consideration, Margaret decided not to back down. However, she was deeply concerned for the safety of her two grandchildren, while agreeing with the embassy to return to the UK. She contacted Evelyn and offered her a sum of money in exchange for taking her granddaughter Jessica on a one-week holiday. Lured by the money, Evelyn agreed and handed over Jessica's passport. In September 2002, after more than a month of living in grief and fear, Margaret and her husband finally left the city of sorrow and returned safely to England with their granddaughter. Jessica, although two of the killers had been caught, Margaret did not give up. The third assailant was still at large, and the mastermind, in her mind, had not yet faced justice. But she could not return to the Philippines. The embassy had made it clear that returning would endanger her life, and they would not permit her entry. Moreover, taking Jessica to the UK under the guise of a holiday had infuriated Evelyn, who had filed a kidnapping complaint against her. So, if Margaret returned, she would likely be arrested upon arrival. Margaret figured that even if she couldn't be in the Philippines, she could still make things happen. She sent emails to British members of parliament, British lawyers, Filipino lawyers, the British embassy in the Philippines, and anyone else she could think of, hoping to put pressure on the Philippine police to conduct a thorough investigation. Of course, she didn't stop her own private investigation either. She continued to pay the private investigator and maintained contact with Evelyn's friends and relatives. Whenever a lead required police action, she still had to cover their expenses for fuel and other costs. All of this was incredibly expensive. But Margaret didn't care. When her money ran out, she was prepared to mortgage her home. Margaret also wanted to bring her grandson, Joshua, to the UK. When Evelyn learned of this, she became even more enraged. "You've already taken my daughter, and now you want to take my son too," she conveyed to Margaret through an intermediary. She sent a chilling message Joshua would meet his father, Stephen, before he ever met his grandmother. This was a clear threat. It made Margaret even more worried about her grandson's situation. She tried every possible means to get information about Joshua from Evelyn's friends and relatives. You might wonder why Evelyn's own family and friends would help Margaret. On one hand, it was because they were paid. On the other, it was because they had come to despise Evelyn. Many had become her enemies because, after becoming wealthy, she looked down on her poor relatives, treating them horribly with both her words and actions, which bred deep resentment. After much effort, one of Evelyn's relatives finally revealed to Margaret that Joshua was on Dinagat Island with Evelyn's parents. Margaret immediately contacted them. In truth, Evelyn's parents were also deeply dissatisfied with their daughter, especially since the loss of the money-making machine. Stephen. At this point, Margaret offered to pay them over £3,000 to bring Joshua to the UK. Considering they couldn't care for the boy properly and would receive a substantial sum of money, they agreed. After more than a month of negotiations and completing complex paperwork, Joshua was finally brought to England. When he arrived, he was severely malnourished. His ankles were covered in distinct marks, clear evidence that he had been tied up to prevent him from running away. After months of persistent investigation, Margaret finally uncovered a new lead. Evelyn's aunt provided the identity of the third killer, Robin Buta, who, coincidentally, was the husband of Gina, Evelyn's sister. But he had long since fled, and the police had been unable to capture him. On June 14, 2003, 11 months after the crime, the Philippine police finally arrested Robin in exchange for a reduced sentence. Robin agreed to become a witness and reveal the whole truth. He promised to give a full and honest confession. Robin admitted his involvement in Stephen's murder, but stated that the mastermind behind it all was Evelyn. He had guided the three hitmen, provided them with a key to the house, and acted as a lookout in the car during the crime. After the murder, Evelyn repeatedly warned them to keep quiet and not reveal the secret to anyone. Evelyn's motive was simple money. She had told him that her husband was very wealthy, with a house and insurance in the UK. If he were gone, she would inherit a massive fortune. The police were stunned by this revelation. In November 2003, with the testimony of Robin, Arnold, and Alexander, who had been imprisoned for nearly 14 months, were finally brought to trial. Robin's wife, Gina, who was also Evelyn's sister, decided to testify as well. She confirmed that her sister had indeed been having an affair with Arnold. Evelyn herself had told her so. Evelyn had bought Arnold a motorcycle, rented him an apartment, and told him that after they dealt with Stephen and got the money, they would be free to be together. These testimonies perfectly match Robin's confession. Consequently, Arnold and Alexander were found guilty of murder. They were sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole and ordered to pay 50,000 pesos in compensation to Stephen's children. As for Robin, because he had turned state's witness, he was granted immunity from prosecution. Now, only Evelyn remained at large. The police had issued a warrant for her arrest, but finding her was no easy task. The Philippines is an archipelago of over 7,000 islands, and at that time, there were no surveillance cameras. Hiding on one of those islands made a person nearly impossible to find. Time passed, and months went by with no sign of Evelyn. The Philippine police seemed indifferent. Failing to find a suspect was a common occurrence for them. But Margaret was restless, unable to sleep peacefully while the person who had orchestrated her son's murder was still free. Then, at 6:30 p.m. on July 17, 2004, Evelyn was located in a remote village in the Zamboanga province. It turned out she had been hiding at a friend's house. Evelyn was arrested and taken back to Makati. She vehemently proclaimed her innocence, claiming she had not been on the run but was simply living a normal life, and that her husband's death had nothing to do with her. It was noteworthy that by this time, Evelyn had been ostracized by everyone. Many of her own relatives said it was shameful for the family to have a husband killer among them. During her pretrial detention, only her father visited her. No one else cared whether she lived or died. During the trial, Evelyn steadfastly denied the charges, insisting on her innocence and claiming she had an alibi. But no matter how she tried to defend herself, it was futile. The prosecution had amassed sufficient evidence, calling 14 witnesses and presenting a rock-solid case. As for Evelyn, despite her claims of having an alibi, she could not produce a single witness to support it. On November 25, 2004, the day of the sentencing, Margaret and her husband once again traveled to the Philippines. They had come thousands of miles to witness the final verdict with their own eyes. In the cramped courtroom in Manila, when Evelyn was led in, she remained calm, seemingly unworried, and didn't even glance at Margaret and her husband sitting nearby. However, when the judge declared Evelyn guilty of murder and sentenced her to 40 years in prison without the possibility of parole, her expression instantly changed. She stood there, stunned, for a long time. Margaret had never wished for a death sentence. She was content and found solace in this outcome. After leaving the courtroom, Margaret requested to see Evelyn, wanting to hear what she had to say. But Evelyn remained cold, wearing dark glasses and not even bothering to stand up. When asked about her two children, Evelyn said she missed them very much, but her face was a mask, devoid of any emotion. Despite this, Margaret left a photo album of the children's drawings for Evelyn and promised to write to her regularly to keep her updated on their lives. But that was as far as her compassion could extend. She hoped Evelyn would reflect on her mistakes during her time in prison. Looking back at the entire case, Evelyn had successfully changed her life. One could say she had won the lottery. But she did not cherish the happiness she had worked so hard to obtain. Her bottomless greed pushed her down a path of crime. And in the end, she paid the ultimate price for her actions. Evelyn's story is a profound lesson about greed and its consequences. Many people failed to understand why she would take such a drastic step. Margaret believed that from the very beginning. Evelyn had only loved Stephen's money, never her son. In Evelyn's eyes, money was more important than anything else. People like that are extremely dangerous, willing to do anything, even commit the most terrible acts to achieve their selfish goals. Margaret's cross-border quest for justice garnered widespread attention. Her story was reported by numerous newspapers, praising her as a brave and resilient mother. Without her persistence, this case would most likely have been forgotten, and the culprits would have remained free. In fact, the 14 witnesses who testified in court and those who provided information to Margaret were all threatened. Some even had to move multiple times. This indicated that the perpetrators truly had powerful connections. Fortunately, the case received international attention, which finally compelled the police to take it seriously and ensure a fair trial. The great mother, Margaret, from the day her son was taken from her until the day Evelyn was convicted, endured 2.5 years of unimaginable pain, never once having a peaceful night's sleep, to uncover the truth. She had nearly exhausted her life savings, mortgaging her home twice. She later wrote a book based on her experience titled For the Love of My Son, which details her journey to reclaim justice for her child. Margaret said, "People praise us for not giving up, but I only did what any mother would have done in this situation. It was a long journey for justice. I have fulfilled my duty as a mother. Now, my son can finally rest in peace." What are your thoughts on this case? The story of a mother's relentless love and a wife's chilling betrayal is a stark reminder of the extremes of human nature. We invite you to share your feelings and reflections in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. Please subscribe to our channel to follow more compelling cases in the future. Goodbye.